I was deadheading the roses along the back fence when I heard the truck pull into my driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. My daughter had texted that morning to say she was tired, that the baby had been up half the night, and that she'd call me later. So when I heard a door slam and then nothing, no footsteps, no voice calling out, I set down my clippers and walked around the side of the house. She was sitting on the front step, not standing, not knocking, sitting with her knees pulled up and one hand pressed flat against the porch boards like she needed to feel something solid. Her face was turned away from me. "Sweetheart." She looked up and I saw it, the swelling along her jaw, the way her left eye was half shut, the dried blood at the corner of her lip that she'd tried to wipe away but hadn't quite managed. I don't remember crossing the yard. I only remember being on my knees in front of her, my hands on her face, trying to understand what I was looking at. She said very quietly, "Don't cry, Mom. Please don't cry yet." I wasn't crying. I couldn't. I was too far past crying. I was somewhere cold and still and completely focused, the way I used to get when one of the kids was sick in the middle of the night and I had to be the one who kept it together. "Who did this?" I said. It wasn't a question. It came out flat, like a statement I already knew the answer to but needed to say out loud. She shook her head a little, winced, put her hand up to her jaw. "Come inside," I said. "Come on, come inside first." I helped her up. She was moving carefully, favoring her right side, and I noticed she'd been holding her arm close to her body. I didn't push. I just walked her through the front door and into the kitchen and sat her down at the table, the same table where she'd done homework for 12 years, where we'd eaten 10,000 meals, where she'd told me she was pregnant 8 months ago with tears of joy running down her face. I got a cold cloth. I got her a glass of water. I sat across from her and I waited. She looked at the table for a long time. Then she said it was Frances, my son-in-law's mother. A woman I had shaken hands with at a backyard engagement party in Oakville 3 years ago, who had brought a fruit tart and spoken at length about her garden and her late husband's reputation in the community. A woman I had smiled at across a church aisle on a November wedding day. A woman who had, in all the time since, never once looked at my daughter the way you look at someone you love. "What do you mean it was Frances?" I said. My daughter looked at me then, really looked at me, and she said, "I deserved it, Mom." She said, and here she stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. She said my blood was the problem, that the baby would be better off without my blood in it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car went by on the street. A dog somewhere down the block barked twice and stopped. The afternoon light was coming through the window over the sink the way it always did at this time of day, making a long rectangle on the floor. I said, "Where is the baby dot with Darren?" Darren, my son-in-law, her husband of 3 years. The man who had stood at that altar and promised, what was it exactly? To love and to cherish. The man whose mother had just put her hands on my pregnant daughter. "Where is Darren right now?" I said. She looked down again. "At the house. He doesn't know everything. He thinks I fell. He thinks you fell, Mom. Did he see you? Did he look at you?" He was on a call. He said he had a deadline. I got up. I didn't say anything. I went to the sink, and I stood there with my hands on the counter, and I looked at the backyard, at the roses I'd been pruning 20 minutes ago, at the ordinary afternoon that had been happening out there while my daughter was driving to my house holding her broken face together with one hand. I was 63 years old. I had been a legal secretary for 31 years. I had raised 2 children alone after my husband left when they were 9 and 6. I had dealt with difficult people my entire life, adversarial lawyers, obstructive landlords, a school board that once tried to deny my son accommodations he was legally entitled to. I knew how systems worked. I knew how to make things happen quietly and how to make them happen loudly, and I knew which one to choose. I turned around. "You're staying here," I said, "tonight and for however long. Darren will be fine. You are not going back to that house tonight. You're 8 months pregnant and someone put their hands on you, and I need you where I can see you." I paused. "Is the baby moving?" She put her hand on her belly, nodded. I took a breath. "Okay. I'm going to call your brother." My son answered on the second ring. He's 38, lives 40 minutes away in Hamilton, works in construction management. He is quiet in the way that I am quiet, the kind of quiet that means he's already thinking, already planning, already 3 steps ahead. When I told him what happened, He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Is she with you right now?" "Yes." "Is she hurt badly enough to need to go in?" "I don't think so, but I want her looked at." "Okay, I'm leaving now. Don't call Darren yet." He arrived in 35 minutes, which meant he drove the whole way on the 403 faster than he should have. He came in the side door the way he always did and went straight to his sister and crouched down in front of her the way I had, looking at her face with that same terrible stillness. Then he stood up and looked at me across the kitchen. "What do you need me to do?" he said. That was the question. Not what do you want, not what should we do, but what do you need me to do? He had learned that from me, I think, or maybe he'd always known it. Either way, it was the right question. "I need her seen by a doctor first," I said. "Then I need to think." We took her to the urgent care on Upper James. They took her back fairly quickly. I think the pregnancy helped move things along. My son and I sat in the waiting room in plastic chairs, and he bought us both terrible coffee from the machine, and we sat there in the harsh light, and I told him everything she'd told me. When I got to the part about the blood, his jaw tightened. He didn't say anything, he just looked at his cup. "You know what she meant," he said after a moment. "Yes, say it. Her family, Francis specifically, they never accepted my daughter because of her background, because of me. Because her father and I stopped. My daughter's father had been a black man from Windsor, a gentle and funny man who had loved me badly and left me, but who had given me two extraordinary children. Francis had known this. Everyone had known this. It had apparently been known and noted and filed away for 3 years while Francis smiled across a church aisle and brought fruit tarts to parties, because Francis decided that her grandchild's blood was something to be ashamed of. My son set down his coffee cup on the floor beside his chair. Very carefully, very deliberately, the way you put something down when you're afraid of what your hands might do if they're not occupied. "All right," he said, "we do this properly." Properly, that word. My son had learned it the way I'd learned it, not from books or school, but from watching me navigate a world that required us to be twice as careful and twice as thorough as everyone else. Properly meant documentation. Properly meant not acting from anger. Properly meant making sure that when it was over, there was nothing they could use against us. When my daughter came out, the nurse had given her a printout and instructions for monitoring the baby's movements and a referral to her OB for the following morning. 2 cracked ribs, contusions to the face and arm, nothing that required hospitalization, but everything would be on record now. The nurse had asked in a quiet voice whether my daughter wanted to speak to someone about her options. My daughter had looked at me. "Tell her yes," I said. The police officer came to my house at 9 o'clock that night. My daughter gave her statement. My son had suggested she write everything down first, in order before she spoke. What happened, when, where, what was said. And she had sitting at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad that I'd had in the drawer for years. The officer was professional and careful. She took photographs of my daughter's face and arm. She said someone would follow up within 48 hours. When the officer left, my daughter finally cried. Not the held-back careful tears she'd been managing all day, but the real kind, the kind that shakes the whole body, and my son sat next to her and I sat on the other side and we didn't say anything useful. We just stayed there. Later, after she was asleep in her old bedroom, the same blue walls, the same curtains I'd put up when she was 17, my son and I sat at the kitchen table with the actual good tea and talked in low voices. "Darren called twice while she was sleeping," I said. "I know. I saw. She hasn't called him back." My son was quiet for a moment. "What does she want to do about Darren?" "I don't think she knows yet." "That's okay, she has time." He paused. "Frances doesn't have time, though." "No," I agreed. "She doesn't." What Frances had, as it turned out, was a very small window in which to shape the story before the story got away from her. She had apparently already called Darren and told him that my daughter had said something upsetting and left in a state, and that she was worried about the baby. She had apparently called her sister in Burlington and described my daughter as unstable. She had apparently been doing what people like her always do, which is to run very fast toward the version of events that made her innocent before anyone else could run faster toward the truth. She had not counted on the fact that my daughter had messaged 2 friends from her phone while she was still at Frances's house, before she drove away. Timestamps, photographs she'd taken of the room, the overturned chair. She had not counted on the fact that Francis's own neighbor had heard raised voices through an open window and had seen my daughter leave in visible distress and had already spoken to my son, who had knocked on that door at 10 o'clock the following morning while I took my daughter to her OB appointment. She had not counted on us. My daughter's OB confirmed that the baby was fine. Heartbeat strong, position good, no signs of distress. She also documented everything gently and thoroughly and gave my daughter the name of a family lawyer who specialized in exactly these kinds of situations. The lawyer's name was Ms. Okafor, a calm, precise woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and who listened to everything without interrupting, and then said, "You have more here than you might think." She explained what charges were possible, what a civil claim might look like, what protections were available in Ontario for victims of domestic violence, because what had happened, she explained carefully, qualified under that definition, even though it was a mother-in-law and not a husband. "The law doesn't require it to be a spouse," she said. "It requires it to be a family member, and Francis is legally your family." Darren came to my house 2 days later. My daughter had spoken to him by phone the day before. I had sat in the next room and listened, not saying anything, just being present. He had cried, he had apologized. He had said he hadn't known, hadn't understood, couldn't believe his mother would. My daughter had listened and said very little, and when she hung up she sat quietly for a moment and then said, "I need time." When he came to the door, my son answered it. I was in the kitchen. I could hear them, Darren's voice lower than usual, careful. My son's voice level and measured. I heard Darren say that he was sorry. I heard my son say that sorry was a start. He came into the kitchen eventually and I poured him coffee because I am 63 years old and I pour people coffee even when I'm angry. We sat at the table. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, which was fair because probably he hadn't. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten," he said. "Between my mother and I knew she had concerns about. I let myself believe she would come around." "You let yourself believe it," I said. "Yes. And while you were believing it, my daughter was managing it alone." "For 3 years," he looked at the table. "The time for coming around was 3 years ago," I said. "Or 2 years ago, or 1 year ago. It was not after she put her hands on a pregnant woman." I let that sit there for a moment. "I'm not telling you what to do about your marriage. That's between you and my daughter. I'm telling you that what comes next, the legal process, whatever happens with Francis, that is not going away because you're sorry." He nodded. He understood. I think sitting there he finally understood quite a lot. Francis was charged. It took some time, the way these things do, and it was not without difficulty. Her sister wrote a letter. Her church community rallied. There were phone calls to my son's employer that he documented and reported as harassment. But the photographs existed. The timestamps existed. The neighbor's account existed. The medical records from urgent care and from the OB existed. The messages my daughter had sent to her friends from that house existed. The process was what it was. Long and imperfect and not dramatic the way it is on television. But it moved forward. My grandchild was born on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 weeks after all of this began. A girl? My daughter called me at 4:30 in the morning when she went into labor, and I drove to Hamilton General in the dark, with my hazards on for about 1 kilometer before I realized and turned them off. I was there when she arrived. My son was there too in the waiting room, showing up the way he always did. My daughter named her Vera. She said she'd been thinking about it for a while, that it meant truth, that it felt right for a child who had come into the world because the truth had been told and held and not let go. I held her in the recovery room while my daughter slept. She weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She had her grandfather's eyes, my late father's, that deep particular brown that I had always loved. She looked up at me in the way that newborns do, not quite focused, not quite of this world yet, taking her first long look at everything. I thought about my daughter on my front step, hand pressed flat to the boards, face turned away. I thought about my son in that waiting room with terrible coffee, asking, "What do you need me to do?" I thought about my father, who had worked his whole life in a world that made him prove himself every single day and had done so without complaint and had taught me to do the same, not because it was fair, but because fairness was something you built, piece by careful piece, by refusing to disappear. "Hello," I said to Vera, quietly so as not to wake her mother. "You come from good people. I'll make sure you know that." She blinked. She turned her head a little toward my voice. Outside the hospital window, the city was just beginning to get light. The sky over Hamilton was going from black to grey to the particular pale blue that comes just before sunrise, the color of something beginning. I sat with my granddaughter and I watched it come.